In the previous episode, we witnessed a significant turning point in the lives of Jin and Jia, as they signed their marriage contract. This event marked the beginning of a new chapter, and with the ink still fresh on the paper, they embarked on this uncharted journey together. As the night unfolded, Jia found herself absorbed in a digital quest. Navigating the vast online realm, she perused and purchased furniture and various essentials for her room. Amidst the excitement of creating her own space, there lingered an undercurrent of trepidation about this new beginning. The very idea of starting afresh in an unfamiliar environment brought forth a wave of anxious thoughts. However, she did her best to push these nagging doubts to the back of her mind, and when she finally surrendered to the allure of her new mattress, she was met with the challenge of restlessness. Meanwhile, Jia couldn't help but wonder about Jin's whereabouts and activities in the adjacent room. The gentle hum of his video game console filtered through the walls. His immersive gaming experience in the next room was a stark contrast to Jia's restless night, causing her to feel a surge of anxiety about sleeping in a new place. However, as the night advanced, fatigue eventually overpowered her apprehension, and Jia slipped into slumber, reminiscent of a peaceful and carefree infant. The morning rays, like a gentle alarm clock, awakened Jia. Her ears, though, were met not with the traditional sounds of a morning symphony but rather with a different tune, the sizzle of a stove and clinking of utensils emanating from the kitchen. Upon venturing into the kitchen, Jia was greeted by an unexpected sight. It was Jin, diligently orchestrating a morning feast. As their gazes met, he expressed his apologies. "Sorry, Jia, I forgot you were still asleep. I'm just making breakfast as usual, without thinking." An invitation hung in the air, as Jin inquired whether Jia wished to partake in this morning delight. Touched by this gesture of kindness, she accepted with gratitude, saying, "That's wonderful, you taking care of me, I appreciate it." The act of Jin, skillfully working in the kitchen, was a heartwarming sight that instilled a sense of joy in Jia. She felt fortunate to be sharing her life with a man who possessed not only love but culinary talents. However, as she observed Jin seamlessly blending a medley of vegetables in the mixer, Jia's countenance underwent a remarkable transformation. As her eyes fixed upon the vibrant, freshly pressed juice, she couldn't help but question, "What is this?" Jin's response was succinct, "It's breakfast." Hesitating momentarily, Jia mustered the courage to take a sip. Yet, the taste that met her palate was nothing short of abhorrent, marking it as perhaps the most repugnant concoction she had ever encountered. In light of this culinary catastrophe, Jia had to inquire further, "Hey Jin, is this all for breakfast?" Jin maintained a pleasant demeanor as he replied, "Of course not," and extended a protein bar as a remedy. Annoyed by this offering, Jia couldn't help herself and flung the protein bar onto the floor, admonishing Jin, "Jin Mincheol, are you kidding me? You call this breakfast? Stop joking and give me some normal food." Bewildered, Jin sought clarification, "A protein bar isn't normal food." Jia's response was less than diplomatic, "First of all, you're not normal. I know you're going to have a delicious lunch at work anyway, so you're being petty with this breakfast. Jin Mincheol, you're so petty." In an attempt to placate the situation, Jin unveiled his own lunchbox, revealing that even on Lunar New Year, he indulged in a diet primarily composed of chicken breast. Jia, however, retained her belief in Jin's humanity and rummaged through the refrigerator in search of a more palatable option. To her dismay, the inventory revealed a bleak reality: chicken breast, sweet potatoes, and a lone water bottle. The disheartening sight weighed heavily on Jia, causing her to sink to the floor in despair. Inquisitive, Jin implored, "There's nothing you can eat?" Jia's sarcasm was unmistakable as she retorted, "No, there are so many things I can eat." "Wow, I'm thrilled." Jin understood the underlying irony and posed a thoughtful suggestion, "Why don't you eat soup and rice from a nearby place?" This recommendation was met with surprise as Jia questioned, "Are you telling me to eat soup and rice alone? Can I really do that?" Jin affirmed her rights, stating, "What do you mean? Of course, you can. You have every right. This is enough for me, but you don't have to force yourself to eat this." With newfound resolve, Jia stood, understanding that she was free to eat whatever she desired. The shackles of her previous life, where her mother had compelled her to consume her breakfast, were a thing of the past. She no longer needed to conform to someone else's expectations. As the morning routine continued, Jin prepared himself for a day of work. Jia bid him a cheerful farewell, peppering her words with a touch of playful sarcasm, "Take good care on the way." As Jin glanced back at her with a hint of bemusement, Jia continued, "What's the matter? Don't you like the idea of going to work while I can enjoy my day at home?" Jin, caught off guard, assured her, "No, it's not like that. Jia persisted with her teasing, then take good care on the way. See you in the evening. With a wave, Jin took his leave. However, as soon as Jin exited, Jia couldn't resist a mischievous outburst of joy, exclaiming, just kidding. I'm going to play as much as I can. I have to enjoy myself before my bank account runs dry. The feeling of newfound independence and freedom washed over her, and the playful banter was a testament to the light-hearted dynamic that was budding in her new life with Jin. A car awaited Jin outside his apartment building, ready to transport him to work. As Jin stepped into the vehicle, he was greeted by his subordinate, Choi Sang-woo, who couldn't conceal his surprise. Sang-woo inquired, "Sir, do you know why I was so astonished?" Intrigued, Jin responded, "No, why are you surprised?" Choi began to explain his reason for surprise. He had been eager to take a 10-day vacation following the national holiday, but when he applied for leave and contacted the CEO to request time off, his application was denied because Jin had already secured his own vacation. Puzzled, Choi asked Jin, "Sir, we've been encouraging you to take a break for a while now, but you kept refusing. What made you change your mind?" Jin gazed out the car window, wearing a faint smile. Sang-woo noticed this change in Jin's demeanor and probed further, "Did something good happen? It's unusual to see you smile." Jin's thoughts wandered to Jia, and he smiled again, confiding, "It actually feels nice having someone waiting for you at home." Choi, curious and bemused, asked with a grin, "Who is this someone waiting for you, sir?" Jin responded casually, "My wife." The revelation struck Sang-woo like a thunderbolt. Disbelief and astonishment rippled through him. Someone suddenly shouted from the back seat of the car, "What, who did and with whom?" When Jin reached at the office, all the subordinates of Jin got so happy hearing the news and everyone congratulated him. From far away Choi was looking at that and said, "Alright, come to think of it, I haven't finished my coding yet. Alright then, I'll see you." The same lady from the car stopped Choi, and asked, "Chief Choi, can I talk to you for a moment?" The lady's name is So Suyin, and she is manager at that company, and it means she is also superior of Jin at work. Suyin, her frustration palpable, demanded answers from Choi. "You claimed that Mincheol had no romantic interests. So, why did this happen?" Choi, attempting to provide clarification, stated, "It doesn't make any sense to me. I never expected assistant manager Jin to get married. I thought he had no interest in women." Suyin pressed for more information, asking, "Are you certain?" Choi confidently retorted, "Absolutely. He's not only disinterested in women, I doubt he's interested in humans, period. He doesn't drink alcohol and is a fitness fanatic." Intrigued by Choi's statement, Suyin delved deeper, inquiring, "Then why did he suddenly get married?" Before the story could unfold further, let's rewind a bit in Suyin's own life narrative. When Suyin was a 9-year-old, her ideal man was a rather conventional one, handsome, tall, intelligent, mature, and considerate. At 16, her expectations shifted slightly to someone a bit taller than her, intelligent, and someone who shared her wavelength. By the time she turned 22, she was less concerned about specifics, she simply wanted a reliable partner. However, by the time she reached 33, she was utterly baffled about what constituted an ideal man. As life would have it, Suyin had remained single since her 32nd year. One fateful day, while working late at the office, she dozed off. To her rescue came Jia and Mincheol, who helped her in her time of need. This act of kindness left an indelible mark on her, and she decided that Jin was her ideal man. She even had dreams of their future together, including their marriage. But today, her dreams came crashing down, leaving her heartbroken. As she wept, Choi attempted to console her with pragmatic advice, "There's nothing we can do now. And it's not as if assistant manager Jin is the only man in the world." Later that night, when the workday concluded, Choi and Suyin decided to discreetly follow Jin, driven by their curiosity about his newfound marital status. Suyin hesitated, questioning, "Chief Choi, do we really have to do this?" Choi, applying his detective-like reasoning, countered with a bet, "If we were to wager between Jin's marriage and the end of the world by tomorrow, which outcome do you think has a higher possibility?" Without much thought, Suyin responded, "The end of the world." Choi emphasized the need to confirm Jin's marriage and intentions. While tailing Jin, Choi noticed Jin's interactions with a rather unconventional woman. With an air of excitement, he exclaimed, "Oh, look, Jin seems to be acquainted with a woman. Could she be his wife?" Suyin, puzzled and taken aback, observed this enigmatic figure, trying to fathom the type of woman who could capture Jin's heart. As Suyin gazed upon Jia, sitting there with an air of nonchalance, the manager couldn't help but break into a nervous sweat. Jin greeted Jia as he entered their home, but she seemed visibly irritated. Noticing her vexation, he inquired, "What's wrong?" Jia, her teeth grinding with frustration, retorted, "What's wrong, you ask?" Unbeknownst to them, Choi and Suyin were still observing from a distance, attempting to decipher the dynamics of Jin and Jia's relationship. Jia vented her irritation, questioning Jin's late return home. Jin, looking at his phone, was puzzled. "Is it really late? What time is it?" Jia responded, "It's 8:20 p.m. "Well, it's not that late, but you should have called me if you were going to be late. That way, I could decide whether to eat without you or not. Don't you think that's considerate?" Jin, still trying to understand her perspective, said, "Because you didn't want to eat with me this morning, I thought you preferred to have your meals alone." Jia pointed out the disparity between the two discussions and irritably emphasized, "These are two different matters. Isn't it common sense to inform in advance if you have prior commitments or if you'll be home late?" Suyin and Choi, witnessing this interaction, started to question the compatibility of their marriage. Jin tried to explain his reasoning. "Jia, wouldn't you feel uncomfortable if I called you first? That's why I tried not to call you too often." Jia, baffled, asked, "Did I ever say that? When?" Jin, digging deep into his memory, recalled, "Maybe in the 5th grade of elementary school." Jia couldn't help but mock him. If it was the 5th grade of elementary school, that was a time when we didn't even have phones yet. Jin then reminded her of a time when, in the 5th grade, he called her, but she seemed to avoid him. Jia claimed she couldn't recall any of it and quipped, "Anyway, what I'm trying to say is," she halted her sentence as she spotted a figure behind the wall. Alarmed, she told Jin that she thought she saw someone watching them from behind. Jin dismissed her concerns and returned to the conversation. "Anyway, Jia, you were saying it's fine to call each other for personal matters, right?" Jia responded with laughter, "Obviously. When did I ever say otherwise?" Choi, meanwhile, had the nagging feeling that he had seen Jia somewhere before. Dinner was a repetition of their lunch, chicken breast and a protein shake. While brushing her teeth, Jia reflected on how Jin remembered an incident from the 5th grade, which had occurred nearly 2 decades ago. Jia also recalled their close friendship during their childhood. They had played numerous games together, but at some point, she started avoiding Jin due to teasing from another friend. This pattern continued when they attended the same middle school. She was the one who initially ignored him. Now, she felt embarrassed about her past behavior. Jia sat on her bed, pondering their current situation. She realized that even though they were married, they had barely engaged in personal conversations. Most of their discussions centered around marriage-related matters. She couldn't believe there had been no substantial personal interaction between them. Regret washed over her for getting upset with Jin earlier. In his room, Jin was seated on his gaming chair, holding his mobile phone. After contemplating for a moment, he decided to send a message to Jia. She received the message and couldn't help but smile. It was a gift box for delicious cuisine. Suddenly, she burst into Jin's room. Startled, Jin exclaimed, "Hey, you said not to enter each other's rooms recklessly." Jia, undeterred, responded, "Oh, right, knock, knock, excuse me, is this acceptable now?" She showed him the 5th clause of their marriage contract and declared, "I have something to discuss, so let's have a conversation." With a big smile, she added, "No objections, right?" With the beer and snacks on the table, Jia nonchalantly draped a cold beer over her shoulder and declared, "Yeah, the beer is perfectly cold." Jin, somewhat apprehensive, asked, "Don't you have something to say about me? Did I make another mistake?" Placing her beer on the table, Jia responded, "Well, it's not exactly a mistake, but you didn't follow the proper etiquette." Jin looked puzzled, trying to understand what etiquette she was referring to. Jia continued, pointing at the beer and gently knocking on the table, "I'm talking about this beer. Does it make any sense to have chicken without beer?" Jin, somewhat relieved, said, "Don't tell me your complaint is about the food again." Jia opened the beer and explained, "Come to think of it, we've never really had a deep conversation. So, we should talk while enjoying some street snacks." Jin hesitated, saying, "I don't think I'll drink." Jia placed the beer in front of him, insisting, "You don't want to drink? I poured it for you." Jin, without any expression, replied, "Yeah, I don't want to." Jia was taken aback by his straightforward response and asked, "Why? What's the reason?" Jin flexed his muscles immediately and said, "It can cause muscle loss." Embarrassed, Jia said, Forget it. I must be the crazy one for wanting to have a drink and chat with a guy who eats chicken and greens 3 times a day because he's a gym enthusiast. Forget it. We promised not to force each other, and we don't have to drink together. So, just go back to your room." Jin, unexpectedly, returned with some vegetables and a water bottle, saying, sometimes, I think we should find ways to compromise with each other. Even though I can't drink the same thing as you, we can still have a toast. Jia was delighted to hear this and, once it was time to discuss something, she fell silent for a few moments. She believed that a drink or two might loosen her tongue, so she raised her glass and toasted with Jean, then swiftly drank it. 2 hours later, Jia managed to finish all the food and drinks. In her slightly inebriated state, she began to tease Jean about his childhood, especially his grumpiness and lack of skill in video games. Jean retorted playfully, insisting he had gone easy on her because she was a girl. As Jia reminisced about their joyful childhood memories, she felt overcome by drowsiness. Jean tried to wake her up, but she was unresponsive. Suddenly, they were both startled by a loud noise as Jean activated an alarm on her phone to rouse her. He insisted that she head to her room and sleep, or else she'd catch a cold. Exhausted and sleepy, Jia mumbled a few words and started making her way to her room. However, she suddenly stopped, turned back to Jean, and said, "Jean, lend me an ear." Confused, Jean leaned closer, and in one swift move, Jia snatched his glasses and put them on. As she wore his glasses, she realized that Jean had a very weak eyesight. Jean tried to reclaim his glasses, but Jia declared, "I'm not giving these glasses back, old man." She began running, and Jean, determined to retrieve his glasses, gave chase. As they reached a point where there was no escape for Jia, she playfully teased Jean, "I've always wanted to tell you that you look terrible in these glasses, you know." Jean closed in on Jia, trapping her against the wall. However, she asserted, "I think you've got it all wrong. I won't give them back just because you've pushed me against the wall." When Jean looked into her eyes, Jia was struck by his beauty. Jean leaned closer to her face and whispered, "Will you give them back, please?" Jin's sudden closeness to Jia had caught her off guard. She found herself unsure of how to react to this unexpected intimacy. In the heat of the moment, she instinctively put Jin's glasses on his face and, without saying a word, hastily retreated to her room, locking the door behind her. Her heart raced, and she couldn't fully grasp what had just transpired between them. Jia was grappling with a whirlwind of emotions and was trying to make sense of her own behavior. The next morning, as Jean prepared to leave for work, Jia observed him from a distance. His countenance appeared somewhat somber. She watched him and pondered how, now that she looked at him, he seemed like the same old Mincheol. Jean noticed her scrutinizing gaze and asked, "Is something bothering you? You've been acting strange since earlier." Jia offered a vague response, "Nothing," but she knew she had to apologize for her unusual conduct the previous night. She decided to halt Jean at the doorstep, and when he turned to listen, she began, "About last night, me." However, her nerves got the best of her, and she stumbled over the word "me." She glanced at a nearby cat and, on a whim, decided to mimic the feline, letting out a playful meow. She repeated the sound and even mimicked the cat's expressions. Jean, understandably perplexed, left for the office, and Jia herself couldn't fathom what had come over her. At the office, Jean recounted the morning's bizarre incident to Choi, who also found it puzzling. Choi asked, in jest, if Jean was attempting to brag about his marriage. Jean clarified that he was merely seeking advice, given Choi's purported expertise in love. Choi pondered Jia's playful cat impersonation and suggested that it might have been an attempt at egio, cute behavior, or simply a playful joke. Jean explained that he and Jia weren't that close yet, but Choi was quick to remind him that they were, in fact, married. With a confident air, Choi shared his wisdom, asserting that the more complex a problem, the simpler the solution, at least for the time being. Jean was taken aback by Choi's words and the aura he exuded. After work, when Jean returned home, Jia greeted him with a warm smile, mirroring her peculiar morning behavior. However, Jean felt somewhat hesitant about how to respond. Recalling Choi's advice about women seeking sympathy and the notion that when in doubt, he should emulate a woman's actions, Jean decided to follow Jia's lead. He mimicked the cat impersonation and added a meow. Instead of Jia's embarrassment, her smile only grew wider, and she felt as if she were a general in her final moments on the battlefield, with embarrassment being the cause of her demise. Jean approached Jia, who was in fits of laughter, and commented that Choi had advised him to follow what she did. However, Jia's laughter abruptly halted as she questioned Jean about why he was sharing their private matters with others. Jean, realizing his mistake, apologized and added a new clause to their contract, keep what happened between the two of them a secret. Jean was still curious about the meow incident and mustered the courage to ask Jia about it. She responded with a sly smile and feigned ignorance, asking, "What meow?" Jean, sensing her reluctance to discuss it further, decided to drop the matter, saying, "Never mind, I'm no longer curious about it. Just forget it." Several days into their eventful newlywed life, an unexpected proposition emerged at the office. Suyin, a colleague, suggested that Jean should host a housewarming party for everyone.